Thank you, everyone. Hi, all. It's great to see you. Thank you for joining us for this very riveting panel, despite it being in the afternoon, looking at solar investments and the solar investment potential in Africa. So I'm going to start off just briefly setting the scene and then introducing my panel. Now, as you know, Africa has huge solar investment potential, and we've all had the headlines. We all know that there are over 600 million people in the world, most of them in Africa, that don't have access to electricity. We all know that Africa has huge solar potential. We all know that almost every country in Africa has a development agenda in manufacturing, in trade, in agriculture, and we know that Africa's youth population is going to be over 40% of the world population by 2030. That is huge opportunities, and that's what we're going to discuss today. And I'm going to invite my panel members to come to the front, starting ladies first with Victoria. So Victoria Sabula is the CEO of the Africa Challenge Enterprise Fund, or AECF, whose mission is to empower Africa through resilient market opportunities and dynamics. And AECF aims to support over 500 businesses and improve the lives of 10 million people by 2026. And I know you're well on your way to doing that. And Victoria is Kenyan, based in Nairobi. Our next speaker is going to be Loic Makoso, who is a Congolese entrepreneur from Congo-Brazzaville. He's a legal advisor, he's a banker, he's an investment advisor, he's also an entrepreneur, and he has over 20 years experience working both in advisory and in investments. His companies are Aris Investments and Aris Energy. And our last speaker is going to be Willem Kuhn, who is CEO of Skywolf Group, and he has over 20 years experience in electrical engineering, solar, and BESS design and operations, and Willem is based in South Africa. So I've already set the scene and a little bit, and I'm going to invite Loic to set the scene a little bit further for us, just based on your experience. What is hot right now in solar, all pun intended, and what is the potential that you see, and what is the role that you see for you as an investor?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me here. It's a real pleasure to be here and to share our experience as an investor in Africa. What is hot? Allow me to give you a few figures. As you said previously, Africa is holding 60% of the world's solar potential. 1% of the installed capacity are in Africa, and 600 million people are still lacking electricity. This is for the context. But we've been witnessing since 10 years, since a decade, that we are shifting from small solar project to large scalable project, which allow us to say that we are currently spearheading the solar revolution in Africa. That's what I can say right now.
Thank you very much, Loic. Now, Victoria, Loic has set the scene, and the opportunities that he's talked about, the fact that we've got 60% solar potential globally, they need to be financed. And one of the ways to finance is through catalytic capital and de-risking mechanisms. And you've had a lot of experience with that in AECF. How do we take more risk and finance and reach the underserved rural communities in Africa?
Thank you so much. And how we do that is right at the center of what AECF does as an institution. Let's go back to 2013, 2014. A few innovators are thinking about how we solve for rural communities getting to access reliable electricity. And how do they do that? They think pay-go. So we get, at that time, as the AECF, 4 companies, and we support them through catalytic funding, which is milestone-based grants, taking on early market risk alongside them through match grant, where for every dollar that they invest, we do $1. Example, M-Copper. M-Copper right now is past Series G. Nobody could even think that many years ago, no financial institution or no commercial investor would have thought that they were bankable and were worth the chance. But what we really do is to work with early stage companies that are high risk, they are innovative, but are struggling to access capital from commercial financiers that are looking for traditional rates of return. And we then work very intentionally providing advisory support, providing investment support, so technical assistance and investment readiness and investment support, but really to be able to thereafter crowd in. So the risk for private sector investments to come into these companies, but most importantly, to come into the subsectors, the value chains that we really care for as the ACF, because we see that they are revolutionary in terms of extending economic opportunity for rural and marginalized communities. Today, we have invested in over 200 clean energy companies. We are the largest pipeline builder in the off-grid market in sub-Saharan Africa. These businesses have gone on to mobilize additional capital of $630 million, which really shows the effectiveness of public and philanthropic capital when they are deployed rightly to solve for that early project risk and get to incentivize the private sector capital to come into these businesses.
Wow.
It is a harder work though, and even as we say that, we still know that the risk return profile of Africa's SME really is not at the place where commercial capital can be able to, flow into it, and there is need for much more of this catalytic capital to be made available so that companies that would otherwise, just stay on or, die at the very early stage can go on and be the M-Coppers of tomorrow. And they may not be the unicorns, but we are seeking at ACF to breed as many gazelles as there can be.
That's very
Congrats.
true. Very, very true. And it is true because, in fact, I think we've also all heard that we need 2.5 trillion in investment for between 2020 and 2030 for Africa to meet its nationally determined contributions. We're only meeting just above 20% of that right now. We need to do more. Now, I'm going to switch to you, Willem, because Victoria has talked a lot about how to catalyze off-grid investments, and I know in the C&I solar sector, your company is mostly dealing with solar PV and BESS investments, including the project management of it all. Does de-risking and catalytic finance resonate with you, and what have you seen in your sector to help foster more investment in C&I solar?
Yeah, I think firstly, thank you for being part of this esteemed panel. And I think we see that in the C&I space, there's a lot of clients that's overlooked by the mainstream funding houses, and there's clients that we've been serving that, by some means make use of bank finance, but it doesn't provide them with a very favorable cash flow solution. So I think the mainstream move towards PPA agreements is favoring a lot of the big corporates where they benefit from centralized PV plants through IPPs, and then they've got their offtake agreements, whereas these underserved areas need to rely on behind-the-meter type solutions. And I think that is where there's a gap in the market, where we need to be able to fund a hybrid solution, PV with BESS, for those clients, because you sit with grid instability. So operations is erratic because of that, or they must run fossil fuel generators during that period when the grid's unavailable. And other than that, they have very steep increases from the utility So Eskom has, which is our South African utility, has increased, by 12.7% in the last year, which is governed by NERSA. So they initially apply for 36%, as a starting point, and then there's negotiations. But what we've seen is, because of the unbundling of tariffs, that the net effect for a lot of clients is that the fixed fees on their energy bills has gone up significantly. So the net effect's not 12.7, it's maybe 25%, and for a small, business operator or manufacturing plant to suddenly add that to the energy cost, directly influence their profitability. So I think there's definitely a gap to help those markets with a more favorable funding solution.
That's very true, and you've touched on the role also, a bit indirectly, that the governments need to play. So I'm going to also invite Loic to just let us know, in terms of what you see the significant role that governments need to play in order to empower these investors and markets. And I'll come back to you, Willem, just to also touch on that point. But Loic, what role do you see?
Well, before answering this question, allow me to tell you a story. 2 years ago, after a hard day of work, I came back home and I saw my son, who was 9 years at the time. He was doing his homework with a torch because they had a power shortage. That day, I made the decision that we could be the solution instead of complaining. So we set up Aries Energy, whose goal is to develop power project. But this wouldn't have been possible without the support of the government, because in 2003, the government enacted a law authorizing private investors to develop power projects. Thanks to this law, we were granted a license, an IPP license, to develop power project, and now we are currently working with an airport concessionaire to develop 3 solar power plants in the country. So my answer would be the government must be able to create an investment enabling environment in order to bring private investors to develop projects in the country, and it's been doing so far. So that's what we expect the government to do in our country.
Yeah. So have a more free market, investment enabling environment, good regulations that then make sure that there's no impediment on investors to do what they know best.
Exactly. The legal framework is complete. We have the regulator, we have the national utility, and we also have private CNI, as he said, consumer willing to buy the energy that we are producing. Within the project I'm talking about, we will be signing a PPA with the airport concessionaire, and thanks to this PPA, we'll be able to raise capital, either investment fund or DFI. We have already discussed with some of them who have expressed their interest to fund the project that I'm mentioning right now.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I'm going to come back to you, Willem, because you mentioned the issue of tariffs and the fact that it's always a negotiation, and tariff regulation is a hotly contested topic depending on which country you're based. What's your view on how that needs to improve to foster more investment?
I think to foster more investment is I'll get to that point just now. But if we look at the tariff structures currently, it's sort of been coming sort of the last 2-3 years that we see this unbundling taking place, especially in South Africa's energy climate. So I think we're in big anticipation for the open wholesale energy market that's anticipated for April next year. And I think that will be a big disruptor in terms of how energy gets traded, and ultimately that will influence how the utility has to set their costing and pricing to stay competitive. And I think if we look generally in most markets where a single utility has had a monopoly for so long, there's a lot of resistance, obviously, to let go of the control they had over the energy market. But I think as soon as they realize that, by liberating the energy market, we can free the economy. And I think that is a valid point, and as soon as we free the economy, we welcome investment. And so it's got a follow-on effect. So I think it shouldn't be short-sighted in terms of keeping control of energy, but rather looking at the bigger picture in how we benefit the country as a whole.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come to you, Victoria, with I guess one of the existential questions of our age when it comes to energy access in Africa. We have been saying that there needs to be universal access of energy or electricity for the 600 million plus by 2030. Now, a lot of those people are in rural and in marginalized communities where they can't wait for the grid, where the private investors are saying, sorry, there's just no ROI for us. How have you adapted your financing solutions to ensure that there is that, you continue working towards universal access? Because there are a lot of challenges, especially with dealing with fragile markets, with conflict-affected markets, with rural and marginalized communities. Tell us a bit more about what you're doing. So
somehow I smile when the word fragile settings, fragile states, fragile contexts, conflict-affected environments are used, because oftentimes we're asked as AECF, how do you get to work in such places like Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Burkina Faso, Mali, and we are in each of these countries. I think what we learned very early on as the AECF is really that we must leave the phrase, no one should be left behind. Leaving no one behind. I really love the UNICEF campaign, which is one child left behind is one too many, and I like using it lately, saying one rural African left behind, one poor African left behind is one too many. When we go into fragile places with the concept of private sector development, what we really are always seeking to do is to move out humanitarian actors in good time so that they do not overstay. Then we accelerate the pace of reconstruction. The moment we have the wrong capital staying on in a fragile context, we are denying that opportunity, the opportunity for the communities to really start having normalcy to return. And it then follows then that we go in and work with the private sector businesses, providing the capital that they need to provide to products and services, and to really work on that which they already know. So number one is, if I talk about strategies that we've used, is the recognizing the power of proximity, that we work with people who know the context, who are a part of the community, and their systems and infrastructure really demonstrate that they understand the risks and they effectively can be able to manage the risks. If you go into Sudan today, it's in active conflict, but there are safer regions, and you will find entrepreneurs who have figured the challenges of moving money in an environment where it is so difficult to get money into the country or out of the country, but somehow they know how to work with the markets in the in the Middle East to really be able to navigate that particular challenge. They know. Someone who is coming, from the US or another market will be trying to think about, how do I get money from London in? Then they know to get money from Egypt or, any other market in order to facilitate transactions and importation. But the other thing also is really working with the actors in the space for resilient markets, and really this is about ecosystem strengthening. So in Somalia, we've gone in to build the capacity of the industry association to advocate with their own government on a better regulatory environment. So they are solving for matters, importation, matters, duty and all of that. And we then provide capital, but then we put in the investments relating to policy and advocacy, because we know these are markets that really we are creating, we are building, and we, in the future, should be able to see those people who are worried about the macroeconomic stability, worried about governance risks, are seeing those solved, and then being able to bring in their money. But very quickly, I just want to give an example for Somaliland. And very far in a village called Dako, 210 kilometers off Hargeisa, is Solarland Africa that has set up 4 mini-grids over the last 3 years through the risk of $550,000 from the AECF, reaching for the first time with Tier 4 energy access, 7,000 households, 380 businesses. And I went to this village in April of this year, and you see an enterprising rural place that you think there was opportunity here, but what did it take? A market assessment that actually was able to say that provided you require these households to just pay 50 cents a day, they will actually be able to pay for the electricity. So using data to and supporting the entrepreneurs to make a really strong business case, even for their bankers. And this business now has not only gone on to mobilize an additional $1.5 million, they have a working capital facility with the Habshil, which is, a commercial bank within Somaliland. And going forward, their expansion is sustained through commercial capital. So possibilities do exist, and I think leveraging on whatever is possible locally is really important. The Somali people are very entrepreneurial. So investors will look at Somalia and say, it is so risky. Yes. But then there are Somalis all over the world who are willing to take shares in these companies and also put in money in these businesses. And these businesses are getting to know that, and they're structuring their businesses to attract that capital. And hopefully in the future, the DFI community could be able to think about their context, even though we appreciate that it will be a long time before that happens. Yeah.
And such stories, I think we need to speak more about those stories, the inspiring but also successful stories of resilient and scalable businesses that have grown in countries that everybody looks at and says, no, we're not interested. We've got a business also in the DRC, Persistent, called Altec, that again, nobody was really interested, but they have grown to an over 20 million balance sheet in dollars because they are doing really good work, and they know their market, they know their community, they know what they need in solar home solutions and clean cooking and e-mobility, and they're able to do just that, focus on exactly the people that they know and the business that they know. And yeah, I'd encourage everyone to just look for businesses that really know their markets. Now, we have met the solar ambition. We have electrified, we have commercial and industrial solar, we've got large-scale solar. There is always the question, Willem, about whether the grid can handle what's being produced, especially by large-scale solar. And the question of grid stability always comes up. It's come up in some international forums. I'm sure you all had some of the addresses internationally. What's your view on grid stability, and how can, what solutions can be taken by companies and countries that are looking to deploy more solar solutions but are worried about transmission capability and grid stability?
Yeah, I think it's sort of a very often overlooked topic. In some regard, we typically look at energy between demand and supply balance. But if your highway is blocked, how are you going to get the energy to the off-taker? And I think that is what we see, in South Africa, for instance, we currently have 3 of our provinces which is saturated in terms of grid capacity. So any IPPs have to stand in line now to get grid access. So there's already, on a distribution level, what they call it load reduction, not load shedding, where they have to switch off areas because the transformers are busy overloading. So that is not a supply and demand issue. That is a network bottleneck issue. So I think the expansion of grid networks need to get equal attention than creating more generation capacity. And there's definitely room, and that's where we are quite focused on more on a decentralized model, where we provide clients with an on-site solution that eliminates that bottlenecks of the grid and grid containment. So you basically put your power plant where your point of demand is. So that's one model, but I think if you look at it from a macro sort of viewpoint, the grid expansion is definitely something that needs to be looked at more seriously, and there's more private investment needed into that sector to expand the grids to be able to handle the generation and the demand balance. So I think that's one aspect, and I think another aspect, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but it's just coming to mind. So we see that in most of the African countries, solar is obviously a big renewable energy source that we use because of the abundant irradiance that we have on the continent. And I spoke to one investor yesterday, and we just exchanged sort of specific yield figures, and he was amazed to know what sort of our yield figures are in South Africa. So a lot of PV plants in the IPP space has been developed, and there's also wind in some coastal areas. But as we transition to renewables, we need to think in terms of where our base power energy is going to come from, where your traditional fossil fuel generators were providing that base. So I think battery energy storage systems are going to become all the more relevant to be able to supply a buffer where there's fluctuation in grid demand, and also just to provide a more agile base supply for the energy demand. So I think that's going to be interesting how that unfolds, and we already see that a lot of the IPPs that started off with their PV plants or wind plants are now integrating BESS on a utility scale level to start bringing the energy mix to the right formula.
Thank you very much. We'll now take some time for questions from the audience. Not all at the same time, please. But I know there are there's a roaming microphone, yes? So please shoot up your hand and benefit from the vast experience and knowledge that we have on stage right now. Are there any questions?
I think we were very accurate.
Agnes?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Victoria, you mentioned...
The mic is just on its way.
Thank you, very insightful panel. My name is Agnes Gital. Victoria, you mentioned about philanthropic financing. There is experience, the philanthropy financing. Can you expand much on that? Because my understanding is that grant, you don't get a return in that. Is there a way we can scale? There are a lot of impact of faith-based financing. A good example is from the GCC, the Zakat, whereby they support projects that are aligned with their faith. Is there an opportunity for faith-based investment that we can explore, particularly in East Africa or in the areas you guys work in?
Thanks for your question, and I will answer it in this manner. So when ACF was set up, it was set up as a special purpose vehicle that mobilizes public and philanthropic capital and utilizes that capital to catalyze for private capital to be available at a large scale, given just the enormity of the development grant challenges that we are required to solve as far as access to energy is concerned, and also matters food security. I would think, therefore, that really, when it comes to faith-based philanthropy, it would just fall in the bigger category of philanthropic funds. I think the challenge that I see when it comes to faith-based is just, will it service just, the community? Poverty does not discriminate, right? Will it only service a community that is going to align with that, or is it actually going to just be available for everyone within a particular setting, within a particular community? But there is a number of faith-based organizations that are looking at using their capital for de-risking private sector investments, because everyone is asking the question, how do we ensure that this money is walking a longer mile? ODA is coming down. Everyone is rethinking their investments in grants. They are giving grants. They just want to see investments. They want to see private sector investments. And blending capital is really the way forward. The only way for philanthropic capital to do more is by it drawing in, crowding in further private capital, and it can come in any form.
Let's have a question there and then there.
Yeah, I had to write it down so I wouldn't forget. My question is for Loic. Can you just elaborate on the importance of local ecosystems when we're considering how to exploit the solar investment potential that is available in Africa?
Definitely, excellent question. We are, as I told previously, we are facing multiple challenges on the ground, and the risk perception is still high for countries like ours. So I think that the government must, and they are already doing it, must encourage local companies to develop solutions in order to address the issues that we are facing in the country. So definitely, in order to address the challenges, I would say that we need more local companies to develop and to crowd in, to mobilize either domestic resources or international funding to address this issue.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I forgot to say, please state your name and where you're from or what you do, so carry on.
Hi, Simon Davis from Ox Delivers. We're an e-mobility business. If you step back a bit to energy, right, there are three basic uses of energy. One is to make stuff, solar and industrial. One is to power our homes, and the other is to move stuff. Obviously, in the mobility business, I think the moving stuff's kind of important. To what extent do you think mobility and that very energy-intensive sector has an impact on investment in solar and energy grids, and how do they work together? Or how could they work together?
So, yeah, I'll take that. I think if you look at what we already see unfolding, so first of all, in African context, it looks a bit different, or it would normally take a bit longer to come to fulfillment in terms of where we're going. But I think there's a lot of talk already about this, and what we're seeing now is if you take your EV, for instance, the concept is that you basically, most people will use on a daily commute 10%, 20% out of the battery for his commute. So there's surplus energy stored in that battery. If you have the ability to charge that battery from a solar source, meaning it's renewable energy going into that, you can now bilaterally plug that EV into your house and power your home from that same source. And I think in an ideal world, that will be very great, because a lot of residential solar solutions where you have your standalone system there, and you have a battery that's single purpose to supply backup or supply your home during nighttime. So I think the dual purpose use of that is definitely going to play a role, and it will definitely change in terms of our communities, in terms of how our networks operate in that space. And I think I'm quite excited to see how that unfolds and actually become a reality, because a lot of the suppliers that we speak to already have that capabilities within their products. So to see that actually come into the form, and I'm sure there's markets where it's already operating like that, but to see it in the African space, I think will be quite interesting, and will definitely help in terms of how we navigate around the issues that we have in our networks.
Yeah, and maybe I can add that I think e-mobility is also going to be a huge driver for especially the solar energy transition in the rural, hardest to reach communities, peri-urban communities. We have seen petrol stations that are being fitted with rooftop solar so that they can have proper charging stations for passenger, two-wheeler e-bikes or three-wheelers. And also in the rural, I'm sure Victoria, you've seen also mini grids. There are lots of borders, we call them in Kenya, two-wheeler bikes that are operating in both urban and rural areas, and they do need that solar renewable energy mini grid capability and rooftop solar capability in order to power them. So yeah, thank you very much, Simon. Are there any other questions? If there are no other questions, and thank you for all of you for listening, I wanted us to end with a soundbite from all of our speakers. One thing that I always think about is that for the past X years, we have been talking about the milestone of 2030. We need to end energy poverty by 2030. We need to assure universal access to electricity by 2030. 2030 is 5 years away. So how much can we do in 5 years? So there are various climate goals to achieve, and the challenge is arduous. What headline, if you think of a headline in the FT, I'm not marketing for the FT, or in any major publication, do you want to see about Africa in 2030? I'm going to start with you, Victoria.
I'm not as optimistic around 2030, moved to 2050. 6 years at ACF has taught me that things move a little slower in Africa, but I really want to see, finally, a prosperous rural Africa.
A prosperous rural Africa.
It will finally, a prosperous rural.
Finally, a prosperous rural Africa. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. And we shall see a huge move towards that. I'm very positive about that. Loic, what about you? What's your headline?
Well, I would say that Africa spearheads solar revolution. Clean energy solution powers its growth.
Africa spearheads the solar revolution, and clean energy powers its growth.
Definitely.
That's a great headline. Thank you. Thank you for that. And what about you, Willem?
Yeah, I think I share the sentiment of Victoria in terms of 2030 being basically around the corner. We see how time has sped up recently. So, but I think for me it would be something in the lines of private investment lights up the African energy markets. So yeah.
Private investment lights up the Africa energy market. So that 2.8 trillion needs to be majority private investment.
Definitely.
And I think it's doable with the blended finance structures that we've talked about, with the solutions by governments that we've talked about, and I'm sure we've got members of government listening, and with the technology that we've talked about around battery storage. I think there is huge potential for private investment to be the bulk of the solar energy transition investment in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on this panel. We appreciate your time, and we hope you enjoyed the conference. Thank you also to our panelists for lending us your time and sharing with us your valuable knowledge, all the way from African countries of Kenya, Congo, Brazzaville, and South Africa. Please help me in giving a round of applause to our panel.